Hello, good evening everybody. My name is McNab Laurie. I'm working on the Galloway Lens project, and if you haven't heard about the Galloway Lens project, then you've had a beautifully charmed existence until this date. But Galloway Lens has got 6 months left, and there's a whole range of projects we've been doing up and down the Kendee Valley. What have we actually done directly that's influenced curlews? Not very much, which is why I was so keen to be able to host tonight. Really excited to have the two speakers talking tonight. We've got Mary Colwell, followed by Patrick Laurie, and out of the three of us, two of us have quite literally written a book on this subject. And an interesting game to play at home is to work out which one of us three hasn't been the one who wrote a book on the subject. So just something to play along at home. So we've got people in the room here tonight, we've got people online, seamless technology throughout to try and provide the full experience for you all. We're going to have a presentation from Mary, which has got some audio clips in it, which will be quite good, which I'm pretty sure that'll work both in the room and online. And then we'll maybe take a couple of questions at a time, and then we can hear from Patrick giving a local perspective on it. So yeah, a chance to really put some focus on the specific species. There's going to be a feedback at the end of it, so if anyone wants to give any feedback on how positive or otherwise they found the event, do please fill in your feedback forms and visit the Galloway Lens website if you haven't already. But anyway, I'd like to hand over to Mary, and to really set Mary off, we're going to start with an audio clip to set the mood in the room. So if that's happy, Mary, if you want to go up there.
It's an utterly beautiful sound, isn't it? I don't know, I'm sure everybody in this room is very, very used to that sound. I'm not. I live in the centre of the city, so I can't tell you how incredibly lucky you are if you, every year, hear that sound coming back. What I give to be able to hear that through the spring and summer. So I just have to listen to it as an audio clip. But you have the real thing here. So that's the curlew, as you know. You lucky people. And the curlew is Britain, Europe's largest wading bird. There isn't any wading bird bigger, which means it's nice and obvious. It's nice and obvious because it's big, and also because of that absolutely beautiful sculptural bill there. Makes it very obvious bird. So people, when you see it, you know what it is, if you're lucky enough to see it. And then when it opens that bill and sings, you really know what it is. So it's a sculptural in sound and form, I would say. And it's captured my heart for a long time. I absolutely love them. I can't tell you why I particularly love them. I think it's because where I grew up in the Staffordshire moorlands, they were quite common. They were actually on the side of every rubbish bin of every house in the Staffordshire moorland because they're the symbol of the coat of arms of the Staffordshire moorlands. So maybe they were up on the sort of moorlands around where I grew up, a little village near Leek in Staffordshire. So maybe they just soaked themselves into my heart, I don't know. But anyway, I really love them. And I really want to help them survive, which is why we're here tonight. So that's their range. That green is their range. It's a very officious looking map, isn't it? Don't worry, there aren't too many of these. But it's just to highlight where the curlew, the Eurasian curlew ranges right from Ireland right over to Russia. And the hot spots, if you like, where the greatest densities are the highlands, the uplands of England and Scotland, a little patch there in the Netherlands, and a patch there in Finland. So you can see out of all that range of curlews, and nobody knows the global population of the Eurasian curlew, it's probably around about 700,000, who knows, but of that order, look how important these upland areas are. Look how important you are here. You have these wonderful birds right in the palm of your hands. I'll talk about where the numbers of them in a bit, split it up a bit more, but you have more curlews around here than I ever see the whole in the south of England. So those are the three hotspots. And if you'll notice, three really different parts of Europe as well. The uplands of England and Scotland are very different to the intensive cereal and silage fields of Holland, of the Netherlands, and very, very different to the boreal forests of Finland. And yet those are three hotspots. So they're an interesting bird in that they have a real variety of habitats that they breed in. So there we are. That on the your left, far left, is a meadow flatland in Gloucestershire, where one of the biggest lowland populations is. When I say big, it's 20 pairs that live there. Also in Anglesey and the sort of flat drained lands around Anglesey, these upland areas, and silage farms. This is in Yorkshire, but it could be, I suppose, anywhere where there's cows and lots of very bright green grass. So very varied habitat that they live in the UK, hugely varied, right from flat drained lands, wildflower meadows, craggy uplands, and really intensive farmland. And that's what we want to see in all of those areas, right? They lay their eggs directly on the ground and makes them so vulnerable, those eggs just straight on the ground. And what we want to see is what's on the right. We want those eggs to hatch out. So those precious eggs, 3 to 5 5 is kind of unusual. So 3 or 4 eggs is the most common number of eggs that the curlew lays directly onto these scrapes in the ground. And they try and bury them sort of in longish grass, so the bird can lie low and they're not so obvious to predators. But it does mean that there's no protection for them at all for anything that we do around the nest. And ground nesting birds like curlews are really, really important because they tell us what's happening on the ground. Ground nesting birds tell us about the ground. And what we do is on the ground. We build on it, we farm on it, we walk over it, we put our stock on it, we develop it, we drain it, we plant it with trees. Everything happens on the ground. So while one of the reasons I found curlews and other ground nesting birds so interesting is they actually tell us about what we're doing and the effect of what we're doing on wildlife in a way that it's quite difficult to do with other species. So that field suddenly gets covered in a plantation, or it gets a large number of sheep put on it, or it gets drained and changed, the vegetation structure, and that nest is gone, or it gets predated. So what we want to see is that vulnerable nest turning into hatching chicks. In the lowlands, they tend to, I'll talk a bit about the lowlands because it's what I feel I know more about than up here. But they haven't actually been in the lowlands of England for very long. The first breeding records actually are not until the early 20th century. They didn't actually breed, as far as any records tell us, in East Anglia till 1942. So they were an upland bird, pretty much. I'm sure you can come in. There's a couple of people coming in. There's a couple of seats at the front. And the way that we farmed the UK in the lowlands, and in the sort of the traditional way of farming was in wildflower meadows that were rich in insects, quite soft ground, and the curlews did really well. So when they came off the top of the moors, they did very well in our insect-rich, sort of craggy old MacDonald's farm type farms in the lowlands. And they really liked that, and they did really well. And they very quickly became what we would think of as farmland birds, and were very welcomed, and they just became part of the furniture. They moved into our lives very easily. But then we changed the goalposts, and lots of things happened, and that's what we'll talk about. So in the last 20 years, the UK has lost way over half of the curlews in total. That's way over. Probably 60% is the average, but it's much higher in the West than it is in other parts. And that is about 120,000 birds we've lost in 20 years. That's 5,500 birds a year just disappearing from our land. It's a massive, massive decrease in birds. So much so sorry about that. So much so, you can see the BTO graph there of the population decline. So much so that a paper came out in the end of 2015. This is now quite a sort of famous seminal paper that said, in British Birds, that said, we think the curlew should be the greatest bird priority for conservation in the UK. So it's gone from a really common bird in the uplands and then in the lowlands to literally falling off a cliff. There you are, it's another example. Look at the breeding bird survey, look at that, plummeting downwards. And that's what is so often, that's the sight I see so often when I go out on field trips and go out with the groups down in the sort of curlew areas I know in England. That's what we dread to see, and that's what we see so often. Yesterday there were 4 eggs, today there's nothing. That happens in some areas to 100% of the nests in an area. There's one place in Shropshire where over 2 years they monitored what happened to the birds in Shropshire. They had, I think it was 20 nests they monitored each year for 2 years. Not a single chick fledged from any of them. So let's get some car crash statistics here. Southern Ireland in the 1980s had way over 5,000 breeding pairs of curlews. The last count last year, I have it now on good authority from the people that actually did the count, Southern Ireland has gone from over 5,000 breeding pairs to 105 breeding pairs in Southern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, they have the RSPB doing quite well looking after them at the moment. They've gone from about the same number down to about 250. So they're doing a little bit better. Wales, records are terribly bad in Wales. We just don't know, but the average guess is around about 2,000 to 3,000 pairs in the 1980s. I doubt there's more than 300 pairs now. And will be the next one. So Southern Ireland, I think, I don't even want to say it. Southern Ireland, we might lose them, but Wales is not far behind. And Southern England, we don't know how many, but they've got about, we know now, because of all the work that's done in Southern England, around about 500 pairs, which leaves the north of England and Scotland housing the vast majority of the population now in the UK, which is about 50,000 pairs max. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? So that's probably 25,000 in England and the same in Scotland. You have to remember there's huge error bars on that. They're the most difficult species to count. But it doesn't matter, does it? We think there's about 50,000 pairs and they're declining at a dramatic rate. So there you are, that's that map. So if you look at that black line on there, there's probably about 1,500 pairs in total below that black line. Right? And above that black line, and you can see where you are there, that's where the most of them are. So it says 120 pairs in Southern Ireland. Sorry, I should have changed that. That was a couple of years ago. It's now 105. So Wales, Southern Ireland, we are watching extinction. And when I first started working on curlews, there were probably 200 pairs. There's now 100, and I've only been working on them for a very short time. So have a look at Southern Ireland, keep your eye on it, because it will be the first major common bird to go extinct that we'll see. Oh, sorry, very sensitive. And we know what the problem is. The thing is, we know what the problem is. We know that adult survival is really good. It's about 90% for adults. Once they get to adulthood, they survive brilliantly, and they can live up to 32 years old. So, they're surviving really well. We know then that it's the productivity, it's the chick stage. They're just not getting enough adults into the population. And on average, it's what's called 0.25. So let me translate that into language which is much easier to understand. To keep the population of curlews stable, because they're long-lived and because they breed every year, they only really need to produce one chick each pair, one chick every other year, a productivity rate of 0.5, right? So on average in the UK, we haven't even got that. They're not even producing one chick every other year. They're producing one chick every 4 years. That's what's happening. So the productivity of curlews is falling off a cliff. Now, Graham Appleton, who does a wonderful blog called the Wader Tales blog, he's a statistician and a mathematician and loves waders, and he writes this a wonderful blog where he summarizes really complicated science, and I absolutely love it. And he worked out that to keep the population stable in the UK, that's just stable at what we have at the moment, we need to be producing 10,000 more chicks a year just to keep it stable. Where are we going to get 10,000 more chicks a year? That's the big issue. So what we need is big solutions, big nationwide landscape scale solutions to saving the curlew. That's what we need. And I'll tell you, those 10,000 chicks are going to come from farmland. It's farmers who hold the key to the future of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales curlews. And the reason for that, one of the biggest issues we found, and when I say we, let me explain what I do. I am the chair of what's called the Curlew Recovery Partnership. So it's a round table of organisations that was seed funded by the government, and I'll show you a slide later, the BTDO, RSPB, WWT, Natural England, blah, blah. There's 9 of us, and I'm the chair of it, and we have been working for 2 years to really drill down to find out what the problem is, and we have done a lot of work finding out what the problem is. And the problem, the top 3 problems for curlews in the UK, number 1, I'm not going to say top, it's difficult to say 1, 2, 3 in terms of order, so don't think of this as in order, but of the 3, one of them is silage. Silage cutting, the transition from the sort of old-fashioned type of farming where grass was cut late in the harvest time, by the time it was mid to late July, the birds had time to breed and fledge their chicks. Now we've switched over to the much more efficient way of feeding cattle, which is silage, and grass is cut from, certainly down in Gloucestershire, April onwards and every few weeks. So birds nesting and what used to be nice sort of late cut, higgledy-piggledy sort of hayflower meadows and hay fields are now nesting in silage fields, and they don't stand a chance. I'm not in any way apportioning blame to anybody here. This is just the way the system has developed. This is what we've asked farmers to do, to produce a lot of food quickly, and this is a really good way of doing it. But when you do things like that, it has knock-on effects. And we're seeing that now in the wildlife of farms. The other massive issue is predation. We have a huge number of what's called mesopredators in the UK. In fact, the UK has the highest number of foxes and crows of any country in Europe. Again, that's a complicated reason. Nobody really knows why there are so many. Probably because the way we farm produces a lot of food that's really good for these guys. Lots of people in cities, there's lots of anthropogenic food around. It's just a landscape that mesopredators like. We also don't have any top predators. We don't have any wolverines and wolves and bears and big eagles and things to keep smaller predators in check. And so there's just a sort of nice, we've produced a great country for mesopredators. And mesopredators love lots of different things. They're very intelligent creatures, and those eggs, those very vulnerable eggs that we saw on the ground, are just very easy pickings. So predation is a massive issue, and in some places, no eggs hatch at all. All the eggs are taken at egg stage. Habitat loss. And I know an issue for you up here, huge amounts of prime habitat where the curlews could be nesting have been taken away, either by plantations such as Sitka here, or by extensive development, and there's a lot of development going on in curlew areas all over the country, or by intensive farms, land being intensified and taking away the habitat. But habitat loss is huge as well. So the 3 biggies, habitat loss, predation, and silage cutting agricultural techniques, are what has caused the decline in UK's curlews. And all those 3 things are complicated. They're really complicated. There's no simple answer to any of this. It's just not, we can't just say, oh, well, let's not have plantations. Well, of course you can't say that. And of course we need wood. We need a lot of wood. We import most of our wood into this country. We're just offloading the problems elsewhere. We can't just say that. We can't just say, well, let's stop cutting silage, because farmers won't be able to produce the dairy and the beef that they do if we do that. And we've told them we want that amount of food. So there is nothing, if there's one message to take home tonight, there is nothing simple about bringing back wildlife to farmland and bringing back curlews to Britain. Nothing simple about it at all. And there is no blame game anywhere. Not one bit of blame goes on any individual or any group. It is a system we've all bought into. It's a system that we all support, and we've all got to find a solution to it if we want birds like curlews to survive. We don't have to. We can just say, too difficult, and just let them go. We can say that. That is an option. But if we don't say that and we say we do want them, then we have to work together to try and crack as much as possible the problem of allowing these birds to breed in these complicated landscapes. There's another one, the biggie, climate change. Climate change isn't directly, as far as we know, affecting breeding birds as much at the moment as it is wintering populations of curlews. So the UK gets a huge number of birds coming in from Northern Europe to spend the winter on our nice warm mushy coasts around the winter months. Sea level rise and intensification of the land is sort of what's this pincer movement really of changing the habitat that the birds use in their wintering grounds. It's also some evidence that climate change and the increase in storms is affecting how the birds are migrating as well. That's another big threat, which is just enormous, but it's worth keeping an eye on and knowing that there is some signature that we are beginning to see climate change affecting birds as well. So in 2015, after that seminal paper came out, 2016 it was by then, I decided I wanted to do something about it. I didn't know what. So I hopped on a boat and went over to Ireland and did what I call the Curlew Walk, which was a 500-mile walk from the west coast of Ireland, went right through Ireland, right the way through Wales, right the way through England. So basically from Sligo to East Anglia. And that was when I set off the picture, just as I was getting the boat over to Ireland. And I decided that the start date for the walk was April the 21st. And April the 21st is a very important date. It's the average laying date, so when average time you'll find the eggs laid in the UK, but it's also the feast day of this magnificent chap here in the boat. Now I can tell just by looking at it that you're all very holy people. There's a sort of collective halo hovering in front of my eyes, so you'll all be able to tell me who this chap is. There's quite a disappointing silence. No takers? Not even one guess?
Columbus.
It's a really good guess, but it isn't Columbus. That is the world famous, and you'll be all very disappointed that you haven't thought of it, St. Beino. Who? St. Beino was a 6th century abbot in Wales and a very little known saint. But legend has it that St. Beino was a very good preacher, and he was sailing out of the sea off the west coast of Wales, and he dropped his book of sermons into the sea, and legend tells us that a curlew flew over, picked up his prayer book and took it to the shore to dry. And St. Beino was so pleased that he blessed the curlew, said, "May your nests be forever protected." And the feast day of St. Beino is April the 21st. So I set off on April the 21st to give St. Beino a bit of a nudge, to sort of refresh that blessing a bit, and also because it was the first laying date, and it was just a nice story that you could attach the whole walk to. So there you are. Wales has the patron saint of curlews. Can you do better than that, Scotland? That was the sort of route of the walk. It was all a bit random, but that little dip over there was to go down to a project in Shropshire to go and have a look and see what was going on down there. But basically I walked through areas where curlews still sing, through areas where they're just on the edge of disappearing, and through areas where they have disappeared. So I went to communities where they used to have curlews. Some parts of Wales, there's a village in Wales that used to use the curlew as the sound of spring, not the cuckoo. There aren't any there at all now. And I talked to scientists, artists, poets, conservationists, bird watchers, anybody, and trying to get to the bottom. And this was back in 2016. And when I got back, those are the terrains I walked through. So it was really varied, right the way through all those different terrains where curlews are. And the most depressing and the most barren and the most desolate place I walked through was this sort of habitat, which was the big intensive, dry. See how dry the ground is? There was just nothing. I walked miles through these huge fields of not even birdsong. That was in the centre of England, and finished in East Anglia about 6.5 weeks later. So when I got back, I organised 4 national conferences, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. I got people together to discuss what we were going to do about saving the curlew and to really try and raise awareness, and started World Curlew Day, which is, guess what, April the 21st. Coming up, chaps, put it in your diary, do something exciting for World Curlew Day. And do you know how you start a World Curlew Day or a World Day of any sort? You just tell people. So you just say, do you know, everybody, April the 21st is World Curlew Day. Isn't that amazing? And World Curlew Day is becoming more and more popular, and lots of good things are happening on World Curlew Day, not just here, but also right around the world as well. We've had events in Australia and in Ireland and in France and in Poland, as well as in America. So I'm really pleased at how it's only been going since 2018, so it's beginning to pick up. But those conferences really kick-started some sort of awareness raising. Curlew Wales started out of the Welsh conference down here, bottom right. It's a new organisation that's just got going. That's the Scottish conference that was held at Battleby, top right. And Working for Wages was very strong presence there. Bottom left was the English conference, and that was held at Slimbridge in Gloucestershire. And top left was the very first one in 2016, just 2 or 3 months after I got back from the walk. The first All-Ireland Curlew Conference was held in Central Ireland. And it's such a special bird. It's appeared now in government documents. I'm going to have to see if I could read it because I can't. So it was mentioned in the UK government's 25-year environment plan. Taking this approach will help us improve the overall status of threatened species such as hen harrier and curlew, the only 2 birds that were named in the 25-year plan. And we will give priority to species in England that are threatened either globally or in the UK, or those that are internationally significant. So they actually made it into big documents that have hopefully some meaning. And I also started my own little charity, Curlew Action, curlewaction.org. Please give generously, thank you, to help us carry on doing exactly this, raising awareness, getting people together, advocating, networking, and educating people about what's happening on the ground. And who knew that the then Prince Charles absolutely loves curlews? He loves them. And he held 2 symposium of his own. One was in a hotel in Dartmoor in 2018, and then in 2020, another one at Highgrove. And to be honest, he was very impressive and very helpful. And at one point, someone said in this symposium, I think we should have a television programme all about curlews and tell people it's got to go on the television. And I worked in television for a long time, natural history television. And I said, well, I'm afraid that's not going to happen, everybody, because curlews don't have big teeth and claws and they don't eat antelopes. So I don't think they're going to get a television programme on their own. In fact, just in a nutshell, curlews are not very sexy. And Prince Charles then stood up and said, I think that's nonsense, he said. I think curlews are damnably sexy. So good for him. So now King Charles hopefully won't lose his interest, because he really was interested, and hence the conferences. And only a prince or a king can say, right, get together and do something. And out of that came the Curlew Recovery Partnership, of which I'm chair. There's all the organisations, and there's a manager, and we do all sorts of interesting stuff to do with curlews and are making progress. We work in the uplands. There we are. That's going to the Northern Upland chain. To Patrick came to a talk we gave on the borders. We also work at getting a lot of people together, normally people that wouldn't really particularly want to work together. This was on a big shooting estate in the centre of England, where there's been a lot of tension between organisations, shooting and non-shooting. And this was the first time that everybody had got together. It was really, really good to see that. And it was a really positive, constructive day. and in visiting lowland sites, which is such a different experience, such different terrain, such different problems. And that's Tony Juniper in the top right there, in the centre on the right-hand side, who's chair of Natural England. And we work directly with farmers. And the increase in curlew projects, this is BTO data, look at the rocketing of interest in curlews from 2015 onwards. So there's an awful lot of love out there for curlews. If you know them, you love them. If you know them, you love them. And one of the things, the interesting things that's happened is this, I'm not going to go into it in any detail, what we can in the questions if you're interested, it's something called head starting. The situation we know is so serious that we're actually farming curlews in some areas, taking eggs either from grouse moors or from airfields where they do quite well but are destroyed under license because of aircraft, danger to aircraft. They're raised in captivity and released out into the countryside. There's 4 projects running at the moment, head starting curlews. When I set off on my walk in 2016, if anyone had said to me, we will be captive breeding curlews, I would have laughed at them. In fact, I did laugh at them because someone did suggest it, and here we are, breeding them. About 300 birds so far have been released from this sort of thing. Fascinating, isn't it? How things change, eh? There they are, growing up in their little pens, and there they are, being released into the wild. They just open them up and let them go, and hope they'll come back. It's a bit early days yet. 1 or 2 are coming back, but not that many. But we'll see. But they're not dying. They're out there. I just think they're a bit confused. You wouldn't be if you grew up in a pen. But anyway, at least they're out. And they've fired a lot of people's imaginations. And one of the hopeful things that we've done is get people, Curlew Action runs a poetry and an art competition every year. And some of the entries we get, this is just from the general public, are so moving and so beautiful. This is one, this photograph I took actually with Patrick last time I came up. That was on that, where were we, Patrick? Yeah, and there was footprints of curlews in the mud. And it really reminded me of this poem that this lady, Sarah Howden, wrote. So if we could have the poem, please, it's very moving.
I do not remember the curlew, only a handful of crumpled feathers, each one a liquid ribbon of mud, set against a faded pink sky, a cartography of longing. I do not remember the curlew, but sometimes, blown in by the tide, I hear a cry that swoops upwards like the outline of grief, the curve of a beak or a bird, more song than substance, soaring again towards the sun.
Be sad. But we have a problem, Batman. If you know them, you love them, you write poems about them, you put projects about them, you just fall in love with them. But I thought this map was interesting. You're used to now seeing that left-hand side. That's the density map where most curlews are. The right-hand map is where most people are. So most people live where curlews don't. So that most people have no idea what a curlew is. Most people I speak to have never even heard of them. There is a huge disconnect between what people know and the reality out on the ground. This was statistics from 2019 from children. Look at those. Look at those statistics. They are so sobering. Most children can't identify a nettle, a robin, a bumblebee, or what was called a cabbage, what I used to call a cabbage white or a large white butterfly. I mean, I find that gobsmacking, and you probably do because you're rural people. But I live right in the centre of Bristol, I live by the bus station in Bristol. Okay, the kids that I see walking past my house twice a day, going to and from school, are urban kids. They would be like this. And it's those kids we have to tell what's happening because they are going to run the country in the future. This wonderful man. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. Isn't that the truth? Lots of people have claimed that, saying it was actually this guy in 1968, a Senegalese environmentalist. So is there hope? Yes, there is. last year, on April the 21st, it's quite a good date that, isn't it? I'd campaigned for 11 years to get a GCSE in natural history agreed by the government. So in England, from September 2025, kids will be able to choose natural history as a subject to study in schools. That was announced on April 21st in England. Scotland, do the same. Come on, get somebody to fight for whatever you call the equivalent of a GCSE. It's a standard grade of natural history. Let's have one in Wales, let's have one in Scotland, let's have one in Northern Ireland. You know, get natural history and the teaching of it into schools, because unless we know things, we won't love them and we won't conserve them. We also run, Curlew Action does lots of webinars and podcasts and lectures like this and all that kind of stuff. Patrick's taken part in at least 2. Well, Curlew Day, Growing from Strength to Strength. My niece did that. It's rather lovely, isn't it? She designed it for me. You have no money to make it, so I phoned her up and said, you couldn't design me a logo for World Curlew Day. And I thought she did a great job on that. And then we have lots of art. The pictures and the paintings that come in, engaging children and adults' imaginations for art. These are some of the different sorts. Schools do things, but also we've had the most beautiful paintings being done, including by some quite well-known artists as well. And that, you know, writing poems and drawing pictures might seem irrelevant in the face of it, but it's not, because research shows that if we have an emotional connection to something, it's lasting. Things embed themselves into you, and you want to be involved. You form a relationship that's much longer lasting if you have an emotional relationship with something. That's research at Derby University. But it also shows that connection is very strong in children in primary school. It drops off at about the age of 12, and you don't pick it up again till your 30s, if you pick it up again at all. This sort of keeping people involved is vital. And we've also taken curlews into the world of pop music. Come on, everybody's old enough to know who David Gray is. David Gray absolutely loves curlews, and he called me, how scary was that, and said, can I get involved in helping you? And this is David Gray's normal habitat. Can we have the, this is on his world tour, which he's just finished.
Hello, well, the sound that you just heard was something that's enchanted and inspired me ever since I was a little boy and I first heard it. It was the sound of the curlew. The curlew was once widespread right across Europe, but is now disappearing at a terrifying rate.
Note of Babylon or Sail Away or any of the other songs, they heard about the plight of the curlew. How amazing is that? That we're reaching audiences now that didn't even know these birds existed. So there is hope. There's hope in the awareness raising, getting people connected to the birds again. But back to the sort of reality, nitty-gritty of it, I think there's hope in the fact that we know that the birds will nest in a whole variety of places, given the right conditions and given the right chances. They'll in the Yorkshire Dales or Dumfries and Galloway or down in the Somerset Levels. They'll nest in highly intensive fields of the Netherlands, and they nest in these very forested areas of Finland. The fact that they're not that fussy means that we've got more to work with, that we can get them back. What they just need is space and peace to breed. And what that means will vary from place to place, but we need to release them from too much predation. We need to release them from too much farming activity, and we need to give them the space and not build on it. If we do, that's really good. We know they nest on horse gallops and in golf courses. You know, the habitat isn't the limiting factor. It's us and our activities. That's complicated. People are complicated. Our lives are hugely complicated. But I think we can do it if we work together. So I think there's hope. And I think you'll hear from Patrick about the situation in Galloway. But I just wanted to give you a national picture. Say it's bad, it's really bad, but I think we can turn it around. Thank you.
One question, maybe, if you're happy to take
Questions now, yeah.
Brilliant. Just to strike, just where you've just barely sat down, Mary, thank you so much for that. I think that was a really emotive piece, and really good to get the outsider's take, possibly on the UK as a whole, rather than from the Galloway perspective. We've probably got time for one question in the room and one question online. We have got the question online on my electronic display board here. Curlew eggs on airfields are destroyed under licence. Where did that procedure come from, and how come they can't be transported? Surely it's coming into conflict with the Countryside Acts. Are you saying we're trying to do exactly that? That's
exactly right. And so they are destroyed under licence because big flying birds like curlews can be a problem for aircraft. So they are allowed to destroy them. But as soon as that situation was sort of realised, WWT began it with Natural England and went to the airfields and said, look, please don't destroy them, give them to us instead, and we'll raise them in captivity. And that's exactly what happened. And to be honest, the military couldn't have been more helpful. In fact, they even offered to fly the eggs into Slimbridge in a helicopter, which might not have been a great plan because you've had a lot of decapitated geese, but anyway. But they supply eggs every year. So I think it's a positive thing.
Brilliant. We did have a suggestion of who the saint was, Francis of Assisi, but
sorry, good suggestion.
Good suggestion. We should feedback. Good suggestion. Is there a question in the room, particularly for Mary, on the national perspective before we cut to the local angle, or should we cut straight in? Brilliant. The question now.
You said the three big reasons why we can't produce more curlews: farming and forestation. The other big one that concerns me is your predators. Not you personally, but predators are protected. How on earth do you think we can possibly breed our curlews when we've got dozens and dozens of red kites? We've got badgers protected. We've personally got, we've been on our farm 27 years. When we got there, we had one pair of red kites. We now have up to 18 kites. We have no curlews, they don't come back. We haven't had them for 4 years. No lapwings, no oyster catchers. Our hands are tied.
How do you tackle something outside? Something is outside your control.
Yeah. At the moment, you can't. You can't do anything about that. And I think this is where conservation butts up against these really difficult, complicated things. So when people just say, "Oh, it's really easy to sort this out," it isn't. Badgers are recovering from centuries of persecution. Red kites are coming back from centuries of persecution. Predation itself isn't the issue. Predation is natural. What's not natural is the sheer lack of birds on the ground. So that's why being predated is a big issue for curlews, because there's so few of them left. With badgers, it's kind of, you just have to put fences up, I think is your best. They only really attack the eggs. That's done a lot in southern England. You put electric fences around the nests, and it stops mammalian predators like foxes and badgers getting to them, and it works really well. No, it doesn't.
In nature, it's not having a feeding station a few mile away and feeding kites or frozen chicken.
I really agree with that. I understand that. I literally know what you're saying, and we can have a chat about this afterwards. But yes, there are these hotspots where it is really difficult to know what to do about that.
But I think if I could cut in, Mary, just quickly, they say there's an interesting, that's really an example of people trying to do something and having maybe unintended or unexpected consequences. Absolutely. And have you seen that happen before?
Yes, I think it is. I think we bring something back and then we're not prepared for the effect of that thing coming back, because the world has changed since it went away. And I think everything is about balance. Everything is about trying to work out what to do. I don't know the answer. Hand on heart, I don't know the answer about aerial predators. Ravens are a big problem in the New Forest, and ravens are protected. And so, but they're amazing birds in their own right. So how do we sort this out? That's why we have to start working together. Yeah, well, there's lots of things we can talk about that.
That's brilliant. If you're happy, I think we've got some more questions coming in online, but I'd love to give the local perspective to Patrick. Just be 5 seconds. I'm going to change the presentation here.
Hello, I'm Patrick Laurie. Yeah, this is my entire life at the moment, this subject, looking particularly at curlews, but I work for a number of different organizations doing all sorts of different bits and pieces for waders generally. So curlews are front and center for me, but also the Working for Waders project, which supports a lot of the work I do across Scotland, focuses on oyster catchers, lapwings, curlews, redshank, and golden plover. And those are our real focus species. They're all doing really badly in Scotland, but to all different levels and for all sorts of different reasons. But curlews are really important for me. And I've heard Mary do that talk that she's just done a few times. I find that just so useful to see what we are seeing in Dumfries and Galloway in that national context. And in a huge way, I'm really jealous of all the data you've got and all the understanding you've got about how the problem emerges, how it unfolds. You've got mitigation plans in place. You know how to rear chicks in captivity. You know how to do, in lots of ways, you're way ahead of where we are in Galloway. So an idea of me giving you now and a Galloway perspective on this, I'm going to have to say just now, we don't know. We have no idea really how curlews are doing in Galloway. We know they're doing really badly, but we have no figures, we have no tables, no surveys, no anything. And nobody's getting it. Nobody's doing this. Nobody's doing this work. And in a national context, as Mary says, these birds are a huge priority. Take the national problem home and put it in Galloway and start to try and flesh it out. There's no latest data. Some of the latest breeding data is 10 years old, which curlews have declined so quickly in Galloway, that's way out of date. So when I have a big logo here that says Working for Waders on it, and I am involved with Working for Waders, I'm not a conservationist. I'm not here with any ecology degree or any background or any credentials at all. I started to think, oh my God, if I don't start doing bits and pieces of this, there is no fallback. And it was a real eye-opener for me to start to think, actually, I suppose a lot of us are maybe used to worrying about conservation in the context of conservation organizations. Actually, there's always someone who'll take care of it. And you occasionally read in the newspaper, there was a problem, but don't worry, the conservation people sorted it. Yeah, that has been in lots of ways a big obstacle, I think, in terms of people really rolling up their sleeves and getting stuck in and realizing that in some parts of the country, RSPB are doing really, really good stuff for curlews. In some parts of the country, GWCT or BTO, or everybody's got their little projects. But when you look at the increased number of curlew projects since your 2015 report, yeah, it's going up and up. It's not happening here, though. It's not happening in Galloway. And we can go into all sorts of reasons maybe why that is. But the secondary and probably much more important factor is we collectively maybe aren't used to thinking, actually, if we, all of us in this room and all of us watching, don't actually roll up our sleeves. And Mary and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm sorry, this sounds like I'm sort of bringing you into a conversation I've been having all day with Mary, but saving curlews isn't necessarily rocket science in the grand scheme of things. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a huge amount of data online. You can get really good advice and guidance and support on surveying curlews, managing land sustainably for curlews, predator control for curlews, all sorts of stuff that we can all do. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. The big thing from my perspective is all of us in this room realizing that it's not anybody else's problem but ours. And when Mary then says, we can save curlews if we really want to, I mean, it really is as simple as take it on yourself and go out and do it. And that's one of the frustrating things. Working for Waders is a really good organization in as much as it enables a random person like me to get involved and really, really get stuck into some of these issues. Again, I would just say there's no more reason why it's me here just now than it is anyone else here. And that some of the work that comes out of that is probably really well suited to some of the people in the room here. And so feeling able to do your bit for curlews would be the bit that I'd really want to lean on to start and in the middle and at the end of what I'd like to say to you tonight. Because when Mary paints a picture of curlews in a national context, Galloway's worse, a lot worse than certainly anywhere else in Scotland and probably anywhere else in the UK, even down to your Republic of Ireland statistics. We are to an order of magnitude worse than anywhere else. I've traveled now across the UK for 7 years looking at this. I've never seen anywhere where curlews are declining as badly as they are here. Nothing that Mary said doesn't apply here, but the way that the decline works is it's a kind of a mix of different things, and there's no, as Mary says, there's no one real reason why they've gone. It's a combination of factors, and we've got a unique blend of maybe many factors that you'd get perhaps in the north of England, or you'd get in Argyllshire, or you get anywhere else in the world. Nothing special happening in Dumfries and Galloway. It's just happening in a certain order here. And loads of other drivers which are just really, really accelerating it. What I'd say, Mary's very well put together presentation. This is my presentation. What I'd say from Mary's presentation, the statistics you gave, Mary, I monitored on a farm near here, about 10 miles away. Over the course of 10 years, I monitored 119 curlew nesting attempts, from which there was one chick pledged over 10 years. And during that time, each year, fewer curlews came back, and fewer curlews came back, and fewer curlews came back. And it's impossible to expect that one curlew chick to replace all the many that were lost each year. There's no smoking gun, there's no one reason why that just went down, down, down. I have to say, actually, I have no idea what time it is. I'm just going to go on this, but it's getting light. Will you start? 5 minutes and then I'll wave my hand. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. But if you're zooming in on curlews, you can see there's a real problem. If you're not zooming in on curlews, I'm not surprised why so many people don't see the problem here. And I speak to loads of my farming friends who are out every day. They hear the curlew. They say, well, it's a curlew. Great. Business as normal. And if they read anything about curlews or curlew decline, the chances are probably they'll worry about it being somebody else's problem or a problem they can deal with later. But the deceptive thing about curlews is that productivity gap, which Mary touched on earlier, is just because you've got them doesn't mean they're doing anything. And that 119 nesting attempts probably made 119 farmers very happy. They never saw the fact that there was only one chick coming out of that. And so my first obstacle to get over in Dumfries and Galloway, particularly, is to really flag this up, because while it's screamingly obvious to me, and the data, as much as we can extrapolate it to a Galloway context, the data makes no bones about the disaster that's unfolding. Many of the people who are completely bound up in fixing this, many of these people don't get it. There's always been curlews. If you accidentally, whatever happens, you've disturbed those curlews, they'll just go somewhere else. They'll just go somewhere else. I hear that all the time. We used to have curlews down in the bottom field there. I think they've just gone somewhere else now. We know enough about curlews to know that they don't go somewhere else. If they're not back there in the place where they always nest, they're dead, they're gone. So they haven't just, there's a nice idea that if you can't see them, perhaps they've just gone to try somewhere else. Curlews will go back to where they're from. If they've gone, they have gone, and that is game over. It took a lot of time producing a really high quality presentation for you. What I've got is 3 slides to show you. I have tried to effectively extrapolate I've tried to, in speaking to lots of people, speaking to lots of farmers over several years, looking at lots of distribution maps, I've tried to basically produce a ballpark of where we were in 1995. And this is not, I appreciate hugely, this is not Galloway. This is effectively the Stewartry-ish, but it doesn't go very far north. It's missing off lots of bits and pieces. These have been the convenient bits for me to get to. I wanted a big enough chunk of our area to show you basically where things were in 1995. Last year, with the help of Greg, who I'm going to point out at the back of the room, Greg and I actually went around and started trying to count the curlew pairs and trying to get a sense of what was where. And as Mary said, it's bloody difficult trying to count curlews. Greg looked at bits, I looked at bits, I heard some bits online from people, I put up some flags on Radio Scotland. We've tried to get a bit of a census because you can't start anywhere unless you know effectively what you've got, what your start point is. Across the entire catchment, which used to be an incredible area, all the way from Rockcliffe to Loch Earl and Money Ive, 29 pairs of curlews in that almost, was it 300 and something square miles of moorland? I thought if we start this, tell you what, if we get 100 pairs of curlews in this area, oh, people are really going to sit up. The sirens are really going to go off then. It was 29. And I think working with other people in the Stewartry, looking at where they are, I think this is basically now where we are, if I can just go there. So if I just go, I wanted to pleasingly just go back and forward on that. That's what we've done. And so this isn't the categorical every single pair marked. It may be some of these represented 2 pairs, maybe 3 or 4 pairs with little clusters. This is now where we are. And when you speak to curlew conservationists and BTO scientists and ecologists, they'll say, if you want to conserve your curlews, find a cluster, find where they're doing quite well, because individual pairs of curlews are far more vulnerable than groups of curlews. And when they're really on the back foot, yeah, the odds are against them. There's nowhere really obvious on here that screams out, they said 3, 4, 5 pairs. That's what you really want to get started. Here's my, well, you're not going to be able to see this for people watching, but effectively this is the pair of curlews that's at my place, these 2 here, and that's up towards Cogunion. They're as effectively as close to a cluster as you can get in that part of the Stewartry just now. And when you take, this to me is an extremely emotive issue, and I really, really need this to work. When I take it to people out with the Stewartry, out with Galloway, out with Scotland, and I show it to ecologists who take a very calm, objective view of things, they shake their heads. That's it, they say. This is beyond the pale. This is tipping point to you can't do anything with this anymore. So when Mary says there's hope, I believe her. I absolutely have to believe her. But I have noticed, and it's not a calculated decision in my head, but I have noticed now that when I talk about curlews in Galloway to audiences outside Galloway, I'm offering warning signs for them. I'm not offering lessons to help people take things forward. I'm saying you do not want to be in this position. And perhaps 5 years ago, perhaps 10 years ago, you might have looked at something like, you might have looked at the situation, an interim situation, and started to say, we really need to get motoring on this, guys. We need to go out today and get this started. Genuinely, hand on heart, I don't know where we are on this. I don't know if this is even feasible anymore. I couldn't tell you if we are going to be able to do this anymore. And looking at conversations about climate change and looking at conversations about biodiversity collapse, I don't know what the trigger is. We've got 10 years left to save the world, 10 years left to rescue X species, 10 years left to do that. For some reason, that hasn't really triggered action, doesn't really trigger the big response. I now don't know whether it's more powerful for me to say, actually, I'm afraid we can still do lots of good stuff for biodiversity and the world doesn't begin and end with curlews. And actually, we stand to gain all sorts of good stuff by doing the best we can for these birds, even if they ultimately aren't going to be productive enough. And trying to broaden my mind on that count has been really valuable, because if if I was going to live or die on the basis of this picture, yeah, it's not looking great for me either. Widening the focus is really important. Understanding how we got here is crucially important, but also I'm aware that 10, 15 years ago, and I'm very nearly finished now, don't worry, 10, 15 years ago, I was desperately fixated on black grouse. Black grouse were the species for me. I was willing to go to them. Black grouse were the thing. Bit by bit, where I was certainly farming and where I was working, black grouse went and they were gone. And curlews came in and I thought, oh, curlews are just absolutely the thing. And bit by bit, they went too. And there's been a few points recently where I've looked up and I've thought, is it going to be swallows? Is it going to be toads? Is it going to be some of the most banal stuff that you never thought of 10, 15, 20 years ago? Never believed that there was going to be a problem with it. Because my father will tell you, never believed there was going to be a problem with it. My grandfather would have said, don't be stupid, there's always going to be curlews in Galloway. So there's a lot we can do, and this is me wrapping up, I promise. There's a lot we can still do to benefit curlews, potentially, and as I say, the jury's out on that. A lot we can do to benefit biodiversity by aiming for curlews and striking a bigger target of biodiversity. But this, to me, flags up massive issues about, like Mary said, ground nesting birds tell you about what's happening on the ground. This, to me, flags up some really scary stuff. And some bits and pieces that I've been listening to recently and reading have slightly sort of taken us towards a slight transitional phase between when you go into the countryside, do you listen to birdsong or do you listen to an aeroplane rumbling overhead? And it's sort of one or another tipping point that we're at here. So in the grand scheme of things, please, I have perhaps tried to dishearten you just now. In a way, I'm also trying to say, surely there's still an opportunity, surely there's still something here. But beyond curlews, beyond ground nesting birds more generally, what's this situation telling us about what we want in our countryside? And that's perhaps I should have gone first, because Mary would have picked us all up afterwards. That's maybe my take on where I am just now, effectively, in terms of curlews in Galloway. So thank you very much, everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you. I really did the room.
Yep.
Now, it's not my job to speak a lot now. We do have a couple of questions that have come in online, and Jan's got a roving moderator role here for any questions in the room. Can I just say something from my own point of view that's quite interesting? I was talking to a local councillor recently. He's been a councillor for 6 years, and he says, what is the single issue that has filled his inbox more than anything else? A new supermarket in Castle Douglas. And so you come away with this principle that people can be activated about things. At the moment, it's mainly shopping things that people are activated about. It's how we turn that into maybe these more intangible, or where do you start principles. But so what is the lesson I'm trying to say here is that people can be active. There is a hope there, but we need to change how we're triggering and engaging people on the topic, I think. There we are. There's an unnecessary comment from myself. So questions from online. Particularly to you, Mary, how can individuals get involved in this campaign? I think that was probably coming from...
Yeah, totally depends where you are. If you live in places where there are curlews, then just find out what's going on in your area. There's the Curlew Recovery Partnership website, there's Curlew Action website, there's the RSPB, there's the BTO. Just find out, wherever you want to find out what's going on in your area and see what they need, what help they need. If you don't live in a curlew area, and as I pointed out in my talk, many of us don't, then I don't, so I can't really do that. So what I do is find out about them and try and tell people, try and raise money for organisations, try and get kids involved. Just be creative, be curlew creative, and just get stuck in and find out what other people are doing and see if you can do that too. There's a lot of things that you can do on an individual level.
Cool. Some heartening points there. GWCT woodcock count is national. Cannot curlew counting just be added onto it? Do either of you have a comment on that?
Do you want to talk about that? No?
I'm involved in some of the GWCT woodcock counting, and so is Helen, although she doesn't know it yet. Woodcock are quite easy or relatively much easier to count than curlews. And there's all sorts of reasons why curlews are so difficult to count. But yeah, you would have thought there would be overlap, but there's different specialized surveys for all different species. But actually, that's again, I would love to develop and actually put a bit more flesh on the bones of the picture because I say it's relatively speculative thing I just showed. I would love to flesh that out and work out where birds really are now.
Can I also say on the Curlew Recovery Partnership website, there are survey and monitoring videos that we've made and fact sheets. So if you do want to get involved, you think you've got them around, it tells you everything you need to know, hopefully, about going out and surveying them and monitoring them, and how to do it safely.
But there is a huge caveat to monitoring curlews. It's that because we live in Galloway and because the Solway's right there, we have a huge number of international curlews who are on our estuaries and on our coasts and on our foreshores all the time. Those aren't our breeding birds. That's nothing to do with what we're talking about here. Those birds will be going to Finland, they'll be going to Brittany, they'll be going right the way up and down the west coast of the Atlantic. And that's where things start getting really gritty, because actually they look the same, they'll quite often sound the same, they'll be heading off, so we're getting ready to breed, so actually it can be really difficult. And that's why if you see, I'm going to say that goes back to my map site. If you see curlews within a few miles perhaps of the coast, it's probably safe to assume that they probably aren't breeding birds. Traditionally, they will have been right next to the coast, but actually we've lost a lot of those birds that bred right next to the coast. It's great. I love getting people more involved in some of the curlew surveying and getting people to get in touch. And we've seen curlews, but that's a really important distinction to make between breeding curlews and wintering curlews. And even calling them wintering curlews is misleading, because they might be wintering curlews, but they might be in June or July. They might just be young birds that aren't breeding yet. So it gets more complicated. Sorry.
Actually, we sometimes get into a feedback loop of the more questions you answer, the more questions come in, but I will keep us to time. But what can we physically do if we know where a nesting pair is? So I'd love to maybe have a national comment and maybe a local comment.
If you know where a pair is and you are not a trained ornithologist, then hook up quickly with somebody who really is, because you really shouldn't be getting too close. They're very skittish birds. So that's why it's really important. If you know you've got a nest in a field, then know where it is and join forces with somebody, RSPB, BTO, GWCC, doesn't matter. Go and ask them and ask them what the best thing to do is for that area. They may say, well, great, if they've only just laid, let's put an electric fence around it, like I was saying to that lady. And that'll protect them from foxes and badgers. And then you can follow the guidance on how to survey and monitor them through the breeding season to see if they do actually bring any chicks off, and if they do those chicks survive? Be prepared to put time and effort in, and be prepared to burst into tears when you see them all eaten. But there are definitely things you can do. If you know you've got breeding pairs, you have got hope. So find out what's the best, and just email these websites and we'll put you in touch with the right people.
So tell people first of all.
Yes, if you're not trained,
and then actions will come.
Yeah,
from that.
it's always best to get some advice. Otherwise, you might scare them off or something.
Is there anything you'd add to that, Paddy, on a Galloway level?
I say that the nests that I find, the curlew nests that I find in Galloway, it has often been the case that I've found a nest and I've even gone home to get the camera to get a photograph of it, and by the time I've got back, the eggs have been stolen. If you want to do some of the net, and it's interesting having conversations about putting fences, because that's not something we've done in Scotland yet, because curlews are doing relatively worse in England than they are in Scotland. There has been a Scottish inclination to say, oh, we don't need to do that sort of thing. That's for people who've hardly got any curlews. But actually none of the people who are actually putting fences up around their curlew nests ever thought they'd be doing that. But so having that kind of kit in place before the breeding season, even having your local person ready to come out and maybe give you a hand with stuff in place. But they say even putting cameras up on curlew nests, go home, change the batteries, put a new memory card in, eggs have gone. And that has happened so often. Those eggs, particularly up the work that I was doing for that 10-year piece of work, honestly, you find the eggs once and you go back the next day and they're gone. I mean, they are being turned around as quickly as that. And so it's no wonder, it's maddening actually, that the eggs never hatch. Because in Galloway, we have hands down, as I say again, having travelled around the UK looking at curlew habitats, I think we've got some of the best chick rearing habitat in the country, in the UK. We've got amazing bogs, amazing insects, amazing plants. We just don't, chicks never hatch. So it's the bird to chick stage that we fail on. And in other parts of the country, they'll have much higher hatching rate, a much higher, successful incubation rate. They'll just have crap habitat that those chicks are then going into. So everybody's got a different list of problems, but ours is pretty special. Ours is a sort of a bit of a perfect storm.
Getting to hatch.
But if you've got a nest, please go home, and even if you're going to lose it, get back there and put a nest up fence around it if you can. And there's lots of videos to actually train you how to do that. It should take about 20 minutes, no longer, if you've got a couple of you doing it.
There's a few questions coming in on the same angle, and I suppose I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't push you, Mary, on the what can we do? And we've acknowledged the complexity of the issue, and we've acknowledged the need to engage people, and people are the answer to this. But if we're currently recruiting a new First Minister, you might have seen. I don't know if you've thrown your hat in the ring for that. But if you were interested in the role, I don't know. But if you were First Minister for a day, there must be things within the power of government today to make a change.
Right, two things. Get your agri-environment schemes working with the farmers. So talk to farmers. Say, what will help you do the right thing for ground nesting birds? What do you need? And I think that step is absolutely crucial. So get out there, do consultations, talk to farmer groups, go to where the birds exist and say, how are we going to protect the birds in this area? How can we make it easier for you to not just cut silage all over it? Can we give you compensation? Can we give you advice on cutting regimes? Can we help you with nest fencing? Whatever it is, talk to farmers and get your agri-environment schemes working, and secondly, get nature into schools. We have to get a more nature literate society, because Britain does not know anything about natural history. We say we love it, we say we're a nation of nature lovers, but we sort of love lions and tigers. It's what's under our feet, what's under our noses, it's what's down the road, it's what's in your local area that matters more than anything. Find out about it and learn about it and protect it.
Thank you. Paddy's touched upon how Galloway is probably not top of the rankings at the moment, possibly bottom of the rankings, but where are the most successful breeding curlews in Scotland and why? Can I come to you, Patrick, on that?
Yeah, actually we are so bad, not just to bring it back as a downer again, we are so bad that tomorrow night, as part of an ongoing piece of work, I'm presenting roughly the same to a panel in Westminster who are astonished by how bad we're doing, and it's particularly an expert panel based around land use change and about transition to forestry. There is a real appetite in England and Wales to understand how we have got it so wrong here, and people are waking up to the idea that there really is a problem here. In Scotland, Angus, Perthshire, Aberdeenshire, areas around some of the big grouse moors and some of the big sporting estates, these are absolute havens for waders. There's a huge amount of data and research to support that, but that's where the powerhouses are. Some of the outer isles, the Orkney Islands, Shetland, where there are no ground predators. So Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland, they're ahead because they've got no foxes and badgers. And in parts of Angus, Aberdeenshire and Perthshire, there are no foxes in it. Some of it just comes down to predator control and the importance of predator control, which we don't have at all in any coordinated way in Galloway.
So there's a couple of questions come in about that, and I know the complexity of the issue, but do you see a difference between curlew success on managed grouse moors or outside areas with no predator control? That probably ties in with that, is that it comes down to the control of the predators, which we've talked about there. I've got a comment here of, well, that was depressing, Patrick, so we'll come on to a separate one. That's more of a comment rather than a question, I think. Mary, I'd love your national perspective on this. If we had a national park, would that help in the area? There's a discussion about a national park at the moment.
Well, it all depends on how the park's managed. So national parks in this country are designated for enjoyment of people to go and enjoy it. So with that comes responsibility. So we need to get people to understand that if you're going into a great area where birds are nesting, keep your dogs on the lead and keep to the path, please, in breeding season, please. And we're not very good at that. So yes, national parks, fantastic, but all depends on the management regime.
Yeah. Okay. Does bird flu affect curlews?
We haven't seen much of it. It's been a bit, but nothing like to the extent that we've seen in other species.
Cool. Sorry, last couple of questions. I promise I will open up to the room in a sec as well. If curlew chicks have more to eat, such as more bugs in the soil or an organic farm, do they fledge quicker?
There is some evidence, actually, particularly in England, that some curlew chicks are starving to death. And that's because of these very intensive areas and lots of pesticides go down, that there is a lack of insects. That will vary year on year with the weather and all that kind of thing. Some evidence, we don't have enough data to say it's a big issue, but anecdotally, some people are saying that's the case. Yeah.
Brilliant. Are there any questions in the room? Oh, go for John at the end there. Sorry, first of all, John.
I noted that a common theme with Paddy and Mary is and this is particularly relevant to Galloway, especially the north of the Glenkens, is the loss of family farms to afforestation. And that is just gone, as far as I'm concerned, just gone too far. And I've been in 3 environmental schemes on a bit of my moor that I designated for wader nesting. I fenced it, I created wader scrapes, but they still have not increased. But I hadn't seen a badger in our area until 30 years ago. Last year we had an invasion of delinquent ravens, shall we say. We can't do anything about them, we can't do anything about the badgers, but they killed 2 calves by taking their eyes out or their tongues out. And God knows, they hung about each day on the rock in the middle of this wader nesting area. So goodness knows how many they took. But so you've got ravens, red kites. I love them, but only the naive would assume that they always eat carrion. I've got a neighbour whose cat was lying sleeping on the lawn, and the dog created a fuss, and the red kite had tried to take the cat. So they are animals that need to eat. If there is no roadkill, which there is relatively little of, because that's one benefit of the buzzards, that there are a lot less rabbits about.
Your question is about the balance of things.
Yes,
and that's probably
so. As I say, I think the raptors or the predators are arguably the biggest thing in this area, and over afforestation.
Do you come back on that, or?
No, I'd agree, and in lots of ways, again, perfect storm. And I'm sorry then that's the comment about being gloomy or being a bit depressing. Yeah, it is actually, and we've got an awful lot of stuff to do if we're going to turn this around, even if it is possible to do so. And I would say certainly where I am, badgers are way more abundant than people would give them credit for being. Honestly, there's an awful lot of badgers, and I know that badgers aren't the apex predator of curlews, and I know that curlews can easily coexist with badgers in certain circumstances, but it doesn't, when everything else isn't working, it just tips things. And that's why, again, some of this, you'd think that conversations about conservation, if we all wanted the same thing, let's all work together. Some of it's a bit rustier and jammier than others, and it's difficult to pick up bits and pieces because people feel very strongly about that. But
the more woodland habitat you create denning and nesting areas, and homes for these ground predators as well. So it's a double whammy, really.
I've probably got time for a couple more questions in the room. Yes, sir.
Hi, Jamie.
Come to you next.
Quite negative, all this. It's a shame, isn't it? Because I was sort of hoping that things like peatland restoration, that there's more talk about, and rewilding, which is a growing interest in, that might help to sort of tip the balance. But from what you're saying, within Galloway, you think we already have good habitat that just isn't filled. So it's entirely down to predator management in the short term, would you say?
I'd say predator control is a really important short-term mechanism, but when you look at the quality of habitat, it's very bitty. You might have 30 acres of fantastic stuff here, and then 2 miles over there, another 50, and then 100. So it's quite fragmented now through the nature of the way that forest creation has happened. there's huge evidence to say that curlews have got a safe home in terms of peatland restoration. And certainly it's a really good habitat for curlews. But when you look again at the impact of plantations and forest edge, it's not just that the forest has taken that habitat away from those curlews, there's then a massive buffer out from that forest, a sort of an invisible force field that the curlews can't then use that. They don't like even being near trees. So that can be even up to sort of 600-700 meters. That could be, that's a big chunk. And when you see really good peatland restoration work, fantastic. But it's not an automatic win for curlews. And actually, when you again talk about that, there's that tipping point thing that I'm quite interested in. And honestly, fine, I'm sounding gloomy. I genuinely don't know. We might have enough here, and there are clusters. Mary and I today were at Mockram, just across the road. That's a viable population. To me, for my money, that's a viable population. Tiny little pocket, but that's a viable population. And there's bits of peatland restoration that would fit there, and bits, but how we start to stitch these back so that my big concern is, like, I loved curlews growing up because they were everywhere, and I think we would all have a very different relationship with them if we only found them in curlew places, and you go to hear the curlew and they become a bit of an objective, because curlews for me are the open that door and you can hear a curlew. That's why they engage us so much, and that's why I'm anxious about when we start to talk about, because already now we're talking, sorry, this is a big long answer, but when we start to talk about how we are funding curlew conservation, Galloway's starting not to be a focus area. So it's starting to get harder to get access to some of your wider conservation funding in Galloway, because from Scottish Government's perspective, too late, you probably can't have the money down there anymore. And actually we're going to really focus money in Aberdeenshire or Perthshire or Angus. And to me, that's a real pity, because yeah, we'll still have curlews in Scotland, but it's a 4.5-hour drive up the road if you want to hear them. And we lose them from our backyard effectively.
Yes. You both talked about how complex the problems are, and without being too bold, breeding them in captivity is, and like nationally and locally, is that not where we're at now? And then, you know, seeing the difference. I mean, pheasants are not going extinct, or any other captive type birds. I don't know. Is that something that is like a drastic solution?
There's no head starting as far as I know in Scotland, so it's only been tried in England so far. It's really a crisis measure, so it's people love it because it's like a sugar rush of curlews, because you suddenly got all these birds in the end. You go, hooray, we've solved the problem. But what you have to then do is keep doing it year on year, and you have to make it a safe place for those birds to come back to, or wherever they go. So just pumping birds out into the sky isn't solving the problem. That's just making us feel better about it. What it has to go alongside massive landscape restoration. And that's what we're talking about. In a nutshell, if we're going to save curlews in Galloway or anywhere else, we have to transform our attitude to the land. And those pockets that we have left, make them work for wildlife. And it sounds so easy to say that, and it's so difficult to do. So head starting might be really useful in Galloway. We're actually talking about this today. This population in Mockram Estate may well be a seed population through which you can start producing more curlews through head starting. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to cost a lot of effort and time. And a word of warning for those projects that do take it up, they start off with great enthusiasm, but find very quickly that head starting is labour consuming and money consuming, and everything goes towards that, and you don't tend to do anything else, and that doesn't work. You have to do it alongside habitat restoration and a change of mindset.
And the headline point is it's a suboptimal response, isn't it?
It's a crisis response. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But it's but yes, you may well might be
probably
helpful.
got time for one more question in the room. Go back to Jimmy again, really?
Can I be really cheeky? Can I actually ask Helen a question?
Oh, right.
Because Helen farms at Mockram Estate. Is there different ways that you would farm there if you could, with grants to protect curlews?
Absolutely, 100%, and that's what we're already kind of looking at doing.
Watch your back, Helen.
I know.
You got a microphone. You're being
Either way.
mic'd subconsciously.
No, dangerous with this. No, it's something that we're actively. been led astray perhaps the last couple of years by Patrick's enthusiasm, but it's something like you growing up just across the water. We've always had curlews and they're close to my heart. And going to Morecambe, I mean, we've got a good population and I've kind of followed them about with the camera. So I'm super keen to do what we can. I spent last year trying to locate breeding pairs already, trying to drum up the enthusiasm for my bosses, Dougal and David. And they're really keen to go on board with that. I think you've got to then, I want to change how we farm wholly, but that's really easy for me to say because I'm totally sucked into it. I can kind of stitch the problems that we've got to the damage that it'll do to the population of curlews, but it's trying to translate my enthusiasm and actually show David and Dougal how we're farming these fields isn't good. Can we change that? And it's just taking time, but I think they're on board. We're keen to do it, and systems are go. That's the plan.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I should probably try and wrap it up there. And trying to end with a tangible outcome or output is often very difficult. But I think there's however many 100 people online, 20 people in the room here. This phrase "knowledge is power." I feel I know more about the subject now, and I suppose what you'd like to say, Mary, is I need to now tell people who I meet, and I suppose that's how 100 people online in the room. It's on us. We need to propagate that message, really, don't we? And get a better understanding. Brilliant. Thank you. So round of applause for our presenters tonight. Thank you.